Welcome. We're glad to have you joining us today. I'm Roland Green, director of the Stanford Humanities Center, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to our spring celebration this year titled Hope, the Future of an Idea. Today, we're going to hear from current fellows at the Humanities Center about the role of hope in their research and in their lives, perhaps, how they observe it, how they theorize it, how it motivates their work, if it does, and what it means to them both intellectually and personally. In addition to those of you here in Leventhal Hall, of course, our welcome extends to our remote audience. Whoever you may be, a past or current fellow, member of the community, an alumnus, a supporter, you should always feel warmly welcomed and included at not only this occasion, but our many lectures and other public events. By way of introducing this institution, let me say, I apologize for those of you that have heard me say this before, but we have new people here sometimes, that the Stanford Humanities Center has two homes. One of them is this building at the center of the campus where we house a large number of fellows who are the heart and soul of the center. This year we have about 50 of them who are with us working on their own projects. We also sponsor 15 research workshops, which together hold over 150 meetings over the course of the year to foster collaboration. And of course, we offer events like this one that are open to the Stanford community and beyond. Our second home is our online platform at shc.stanford.edu, where our community expands to include not only current but past fellows, not only current graduate students, but our past students who are now elsewhere, not only today's visitors, but past visitors with whose work we remain in contact. And of course, that's to say nothing of future fellows, future students, future visitors, and a public that extends from Palo Alto around the world. Two of the activities that I said were located in the physical building, the workshops and the public events, also take place in the virtual space, often to populations that far exceed our capacity in this room or any of our physical spaces. To give you an idea of how much our reach has changed over the last 4 years, in the first 40 years of our existence, from 1980 to 2020, during which time we did no online events, we estimate that we reached a cumulative audience in this space and elsewhere of about 20,000 people. In 2021, one of our first online events, it was still the pandemic, so it was online only, we hosted a presidential lecture in the humanities and arts by the historian Timothy Snyder. That lecture has been viewed 37,000 times, almost double our 40-year cumulative audience for one event. Last year, for all of our hybrid events, we had over 71,000 online visitors. Now, one important part of our virtual home is Arcade, our digital salon, subtitled The Humanities in the World. Arcade is where we publish new work in a variety of settings, from informal to peer-reviewed. One of Arcade's features in particular, called Colloquies, gathers recent work on emerging topics and invites readers to comment, share, remix, and perhaps to contribute something themselves. For this event, on Hope, we opened a colloquy with today's title, Hope, the Future of an Idea, and we invited this year's fellows to contribute their reflections. The colloquy is published and available on the Arcade homepage, which you can find on the SHC homepage. And like all colloquies, it will remain open for further submissions. You might be attending here and be moved to comment. You might want to submit something yourself. You might have an idea based on something you're hearing today. Fellows are still welcome to send in something. Everyone is invited to participate. Before we begin, I'd like to mention to our remote audience that real-time captioning is available. Please click on the closed caption icon at the bottom where it says CC to start or stop viewing the captioning. The up arrow adjacent to the icon permits you to show subtitles, view the full transcript, and adjust captions as needed. Our format today includes brief remarks by 4 current fellows, all of whom have reflective pieces in the colloquy. If you get interested in what they're saying here, you may want to go read more of what they have to say. After their presentations, we'll proceed with a panel discussion for about 20 minutes before inviting other fellows who are here and audience members to join in the conversation with their own questions. And as always in our hybrid events, we encourage questions from both audiences, in person and virtual. Members of the virtual audience who would like to submit a question, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we will do our best to include it in the conversation. And I'd like to mention that today's presentation is being recorded, and in the coming days, it will end up in the colloquy with everything else. Now, when we conceived the topic for this celebration, we found hope especially intriguing as a topic because it spans the personal and the intellectual. It's everywhere, and yet it can be easily dismissed as idealist or illusory. And we thought that an event such as this one would encourage us to think about our research, not in the usual ways, but from an angle, so to speak. What I wrote in the introduction to the colloquy is that we want to, in this event, we want to do something to restore the grain of hope as a concept, not a two-dimensional answer to three-dimensional problems, but as something in its own three dimensions. So let me very briefly introduce our presenters in the order that they will be speaking. And this is a very brief introduction of people about whom I could say a lot after being with them for a whole year. Jisha Menon is professor of theater and performance studies here at Stanford. She's the author of two wonderful books, Brutal Beauty, Aesthetics and Aspiration in Urban India, and The Performance of Nationalism, India, Pakistan, and the Memory of Partition. Joseph Wager is PhD candidate in Iberian and Latin American cultures at Stanford. He is writing a dissertation focused on the form of stories about desaparecidos, disappeared people, in contemporary Colombia and Mexico. Ya Zhuo is associate professor of history at UC Santa Barbara. She is a cultural historian of Middle and Late Imperial China and is the author of Shen Guo's Empiricism, as well as, that's a book, as well as articles on subjects such as theory of knowledge, sensory history, medical history, book history, and the history of emotions. And Samia Arab, postdoctoral fellow, is a historian. He holds a PhD in history from the University of California, Davis, and an MA in Arab Studies from Georgetown. Her research and teaching focus on trans-regional histories of racial capitalism, slavery, and empire. I've introduced all four of them. I missed them already. It's going to be so hard to say goodbye to them and to all the rest of our fellows at the end of this year. Jisha, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Roland, for that generous introduction and also for your visionary leadership and this provocation for all of us to think about hope today. I also want to briefly mention Kelda, Helen, Andreas, Eric, and all the staff here who've been extraordinary in creating this incredible intellectual community for us and offering a space wonderfully convivial. So I want to share something I wrote on arts and abolition. In May 2020, the world viewed the image of a policeman, hand in pocket, nonchalantly grind his knee into the neck of George Floyd and casually kill him. Protests erupted and murals of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless other victims of police brutality proliferated in public spaces, including Stanford Oval and downtown Palo Alto. The Black Spring of 2020 triggered a powerful social movement in this country and across the world. The murals that proliferated across city streets joined a long history of public artworks. In 2013, the visual artist Sophia Dawson created a mural, Every Mother's Son, which showcases images of mothers of slain youth. The juxtaposition of the mothers underscores both the passage of time as well as the historical repetition of this particular scenario of Black mothers mourning the untimely deaths of their sons. In August 2014, just days after the killing of unarmed 18-year-old African-American teenager and aspiring rapper Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, the singer-songwriter J. Cole released his haunting elegy, Be Free, dedicated to every young Black man in America. Weaving in prose and poetry, speech and melody, the song evokes a haunting symphony of racial mourning. In March 2015, New York's Armory Art Fair was the scene of a momentary die-in. About a dozen performers echoed Eric Garner's last words, "I can't breathe," before dramatically falling to the ground. The protest performance revivified and multiplied Eric Garner, an unarmed Black man who struggled for breath and died. So at the heart of my project, I asked, how might we imagine a world without prisons and police? How might the arts move us toward this vision of abolition? Hope is at the heart of all visions for abolition. Abolition requires us to imagine and strive toward a future that does not resolve its problems by putting people away, but rather enriches the communities we live in. So it's not just about defunding police and decarceration. It is fundamentally a positive vision of transformed social relations and human flourishing. These public art projects not only protest against state violence, but also look toward a horizon and imagine creativity and care rather than retaliation and punitiveness as a response to harm. So they make vivid that abolition is not just an unrealistic utopian vision, and they insist on training our imaginations to conceive of hope as structurally inhering in our present moment, rather than as the promise of a future yet to come. So by discohering the linear teleology of developmental time that flows from past to present to future, these artworks insist on the presentness of hope in ways that attempt to generate futures that are already inscribed in this particular moment. So while hope is always structurally positioned as futural, a horizon that we strive toward, art offers a radiant clarity that makes visible untapped potentialities within our present. In showing us worlds as they could be, art ruptures the cynicism of the present. It reminds us that the present is not nearly as homogeneous as we'd like to believe, and hope resides in that heterogeneous now. That is the sense of hope that we hear in the sorrow songs, in the theater of the oppressed, in the protest literature of working classes across the world. So while social scientists and legal reformers generate policy solutions and advocate for legal amendments, imaginative arts have a different role to play. They make vivid scenes of social suffering, invite us to inhabit and dwell in these moments, awaken our social receptivity, and renew our sense of ethical responsibility. In doing so, arts oscillates between a clear-eyed view of the world as it is and a hope to transform the world as it could be. Thank you.
I'd like to echo Jisha's words. That's been a pleasure to be working with the folks here at the Humanities Center, the faculty and the fellows. And I'm very grateful for the year I've had here. And it's a pleasure to be at this table with Jisha Jha and Samia. All right. Last year, Chile marked 50 years since the coup that resulted in Augusto Pinochet's dictatorship and thousands of enforced disappearances. In a protest first carried out in 1978 and performed to this day, Chilean women dance La Cueca, officially declared the country's national dance. In this version, women first toast to truth and justice in the rebuilding of Chile's social fabric. They then staple a photo of a disappeared partner to their chest and dance La Cueca Sola, or the Cueca alone. This dance undercuts familiarity with La Cueca, which is traditionally danced with a partner. A striking rendition replaces two bodies with one. La Cueca Sola highlights the void created by disappearance, as these women choreograph their bodies around a structuring absence. This dance insists on individuals' identities as a mode of resistance to the dictatorship's attempts to impose a faceless mask on the victims of disappearance. By bringing in indirect victims, reinscribing forms of protest, and reordering the national script, La Cueca Sola situates dictatorial destruction of daily life within the image of a dance being done without one's partner, an idiom of the social fabric in times of disappearance. Thousands of miles to the north, Colombia has suffered massive levels of disappearance as part of its internal armed conflict, which lasted decades and officially ended, in quotes, in 2016. In the midst of a long-running transitional justice process, the details are chilling, with an estimated 210,000 disappearances since 1985. And these disappearances have been carried out by an array of state and especially non-state actors under democratic governments. The realities and the hopes are different from Chile. Laura Mora Ortega's award-winning narrative film, Los Reyes del Mundo, The Kings of the World, powerfully portrays the effects of disappearance. Released in 2022, the film features 5 untrained actors impacted by armed conflict who set out to create their own family structure in a small town far from the violence they face as unhoused youth in the city of Medellin. The film depicts the disappearance of one of the boys and directly ties this crime to the spread of illegal gold mining projects. Perhaps it is no coincidence that a dance in the film provides its kernel of hope. Early in the journey, the boys stumble upon a sex workers' establishment in the Colombian countryside. The women, the film suggests, with tearful glances at photos, have also been affected by disappearance. The boys and the older women share a beer, and in dreamlike tones and a haunting piano invade the camera. The entire group begins to dance slowly, tenderly, subverting viewers' expectations of the encounter in this place. The boys' interaction with the women emphasizes the potential for new forms of community building in a post-conflict setting, a connection through the shared experience of navigating the aftermath of disappearance. In Colombia's transitional justice process, the problem to be overcome is not just the relationship between disappearance and development projects, such as the gold mining operation, but also the changes to the social fabric. The film's dance stages non-productive performance to tell a story about the imagination of hope in post-conflict Colombia. As law and performance scholar Anna Kimmel notes, the body is a source of legal knowledge. La Cueca Sola and Los Reyes take this premise seriously, treating the dancing body as organizing discourse about how each country works through transitional justice. And I place these examples of dancing transitional justice together in the spirit of understanding how hopes reflect a framing of the problem, to say it with David Scott. The shared dances and contextual specificities evoke the problem to be overcome, the differing modes and actors involved in disappearance, and the new scripts forged by women who resist disappearance, whether by directing films or organizing powerful protests. These dances, I submit, are part of what one human rights lawyer terms strategic imagination. In their own ways, the dances rely on strategic imagination, arranging patterns and possibilities that consider various forms of imagining community against the backdrop of disappearance. Each dance emerges from an assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of the tools at hand and establishes new forms of hope made thinkable through their choreographed idioms. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all very much for being here together with us on this very special day. And I wanted to resonate with my wonderful colleagues here, panelists here, to extending my thanks to Roland, as well as the amazing, amazing staff of the Humanities Centers here, who has provided us with the most intellectually provocative and stimulating and nurturing intellectual environment I have ever personal experience. So thank you. So I am going to make 2 hot takes today. and I'll start with talking about what hope means to me personally. To be honest, my first reaction to this subject is a question. Is hope in general altogether a positive word? And the answer seems to be yes. Like ice cream, fresh air, and chocolate cake, hope is a desirable thing we want, right? Quoting my brilliant colleague Orit in the audience, she's written an essay on a woman whose name is Hope. And in fact, hope in multiple languages can be a beautiful woman's name. Well, despair never is. If you know somebody whose name is despair, let me know afterwards. So that's my strongest evidence that hope is something that we like and prefer, right? But I do have a personal puzzle here because Buddhism constantly discourages people from clinging to hope. I am a practicing Buddhist and I care about being a good one. So I am very compelled to figure out why. So how do we normally define hope? In very, very simple terms, hope is a future-oriented desire, right? It's a two-part definition, orientation towards the future, and then it's a desire. Buddhism has qualms about both parts. For one, if one focuses too much on the future, that distracts our attention away from the present and then creates anxiety. And desire is a usual suspect because Buddhism believes that it creates attachments and lures people into unhealthy self-centeredness, both major sources of human suffering. But this does not mean that Buddhism wants us to stop hoping and then lie down in despair. Forget about tomorrow, enjoy today, be nice and do yoga, etc. Quite the opposite. Some of the Buddhist monks might be the most diligent people, hardworking people you have ever met in your life. They work tirelessly and courageously to help other people and fight against injustice. So to me, the question now is what it is in hope that we wish to retain, following this line of reasoning. I think is the motivational thrust, is the willingness to devote oneself. And the parts that we should hold precautions against is to what one is oriented and to devote oneself. In our current times, the narrative that governs hope, unfortunately, is a highly teleological one. And what we hope for is normally a form of interest enclosed in a territory where one, the self, goes imperial over others and community. And the situation becomes exacerbated when we don't keep a critical distance between hope and the traditional liberal and neoliberal values that elevate self-sufficiency, independence, as well as sense of control. In plain language, when we're hoping, it's like saying, me, want. Okay, my take one, not very positive. So I'll make an effort again to go to my hot take two. So what does hope mean for me in my research? I'm a medieval China historian, and I've been working on the book on crying and tears in medieval China over the past year. And at first sight, nothing is too hopeful there. So mourning, crying, grief, bereavement, all that. But the question is, can one cry hopeful tears with that motivational thrust, that heat to activate and mobilize? And the historical figures I study keep telling me yes, very loudly, and keep pushing me to see how powerful their tears could be. I'll share with you the most prominent literary anecdote about tears and crying in ancient China. So this is about a woman who shattered the Great Wall with her tears. So this woman who's a commoner who lives 2,000 years ago in ancient China, and her husband used to be a soldier. And then both of them lived under an emperor who was an Orhak. And her husband, the soldier, died in a completely unnecessary war. After the woman hears the news, she travels across the country to mourn her husband. And she flows ferocious tears, to the extent those tears shatter the Great Wall and reveal the body of her husband who has been confined within. And then afterwards, she buried him properly and she commits suicide. So what do we make of this? Centrally and obviously, I think the message is that her tears are supposed to be powerful, right? Human existence is a realm where what appears to be contradictions are necessarily intertwined. So some of the entrenched dualism in our ideas are actually not very helpful here. For instance, that strength is active versus weakness is passive. This kind of contracts to me are nothing more than reductive wishful thinking. Actually, as human beings, we constantly witness strengths and weakness simultaneously as human beings. So I think that's part of the message of the story. Or in the beautiful words by the French scholar Hélène Cixous, it's a force in their fragility. La force de la fragilité. So now let's come back to hope. I couldn't help but notice that a very important component of a hope is an element of vulnerability. Because while we are hoping, we are experiencing a form of openness, open to be affected in the ways that we cannot control. Acknowledging vulnerability, yours and mine, helps us to hope in more genuine human terms, in the ways that we could courageously acknowledge our interdependence with other fellow human beings. And in a world where suffering runs rampant and has to stop. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I think I'm the only one who's actually going to still be here next year, so not goodbye, which is great for me. So hope, right? I got to be honest with you folks. When Roland asked me to talk about hope, I thought to myself, hope, really? You want the exiled Arab journalist turned historian on slavery and sugar plantations to talk about hope? So here goes. So admittedly, I've had a fraught relationship with hope. I've learned to embrace hope like I embrace my old friend Dana, who owes me money, with a cordial skepticism. She's currently running for office, by the way. Reminds me I should reach out to her. Anyways, yeah, hope, right? So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Moroccan. And for those who aren't familiar with Moroccan history, we've had our fair share of invasions and occupations since ancient times. That Moroccan hospitality, am I right? Naturally, this poses a challenge when trying to learn about your family history, something my first grade teacher didn't fully appreciate when she gave me a D for my family tree homework assignment because I couldn't fill up the slots beyond my paternal grandfather. It stuck with me and was probably the reason why I was drawn to the field of history. It was either that or learning about the most famous historical event to take place on my birthday, which was the execution of Anne Boleyn. In any case, no one in my family was really helpful. So my dad was very matter of fact. He said, we don't know anything about your grandfather. All we have are his military records from when he was enlisted in the French army. So when I started my master's at Georgetown, I chose a topic that conveniently allowed me to also access the archives that held the records of Moroccan soldiers who fought for the French army. Lo and behold, I found the initial record of his enlistment. The birthday was the same, the city of birth was the same, but two things stood out. His last name was bin Shariqi, not Arazuki, and he identified his religion as Judaism, not Islam. Now, when I found his renewed enlistment records from a few years later, things in Morocco were a little bit different. All right, let's just say there was a lot more swastikas and Roman salutes, the standard accoutrements of a Nazi occupation, if you will. When it came down to the moment of his Sophie's choice, my grandfather said shalom and salam alaikum his way out of that mishigas. Thank you. This is my debut into stand-up, by the way. My poor grandfather, may he rest in peace, really leaned into the Muslim vibes. I mean, when he took on Arazuki as a last name, he threw in an extra R and Z just for good measure. Talk about giving him the old razzle-dazzle. But of course, he could possibly predict that decades later, his granddaughter, me, so proud of her Muslim faith, wearing her color-coordinated hijab, minding her business in her 6th grade classroom, would witness 9/11 unfold just a few miles away from the Pentagon. Yeah, it turns out hitting puberty during the height of Islamophobia while living in the DC area makes for quite the angsty adolescence. But who knows, what if my grandfather became a Methodist? But actually, I don't think I would have had sense of humor. I'm sorry to any Methodists in the room. In all seriousness, it's in the face of utter hopelessness that I found glimmers of hope, and nowhere have I found more hope than in studying the history of those who endured and survived against all odds, when the simple act of breathing becomes persistence, insistence, and perseverance. A hearty laugh amidst sorrow, a warm embrace amidst strife, a loving song amidst fight, a blooming rose amid thorns. And it is precisely in spaces like the Stanford Humanities Center where I found solace and comfort in being part of a community that keeps those glimmers of hope alight, even when it feels impossible. I want to end with a quote from a very scholarly source, episode 16, season 3 of Seinfeld, George Costanza. I don't want hope. Hope is killing me. My dream is to become hopeless. Jerry. Oh, so hopelessness is the key? George, it's my only hope. I promised I was gonna clean up. I asked permission to do that.
All right. So we're going to move into a conversation among, now that you've met these 4 scholars and characters, I want to remind you that they are 4 out of about 50. We have about 45 others that could have been up here talking about their ideas and their work and their thoughts about hope. So if you're new to the Stanford Humanities Center, just imagine the kind of conversations we have here every day at lunch, 5 days a week, with 50 people of this sort talking to each other ferociously about their ideas, their lives, and everything else. I wanted to start, before we open it up to everybody in the audience to comment, I wanted to start by asking the 4 speakers if they had thoughts about each other's presentations, reactions to what each other said. So different from each other, and yet they work together so beautifully.
I'm happy to.
Jisha, please.
So I was actually really struck to pick out a couple of common themes that ran across all of our papers. The first was just the question of embodiedness and the extent to which the body emerges in these discourses of hope, right from thinking about these bodies that are so precarious to the dancing bodies or the filmic bodies, as well as the crying bodies. And then, of course, Samia, the laughing bodies. I mean, how you had us all uproariously in laughter as we're contemplating questions of hope. So thinking about what are the dimensions, just the corporeal investments in hope, the somatic investments that we have in hope. And the other thread that I found really interesting was that we're all sort of thinking about the temporality of hope. You know, it's teleology, yeah, as you're mentioning it, in that there is a particular kind of futurity to hope that I found all of us kind of maybe grappling with, critiquing a little bit and talking about its presentness in a way, but it also opened up for me the question of maybe thinking about the spatiality of hope, thinking about its sociality, because it does seem that it's in these moments of togetherness, as you're saying, vulnerability, that openness to encounters with difference and with otherness, or in struggle and solidarity, as Joe, that you're putting it, or even Samia, the account of personal memory in the classroom, which is also a kind of social space. So I wonder if shifting from thinking about hope as a temporal affect or cognitive, sort of concept, is there a way we could maybe think about its potentiality residing also in its spatiality, in its liveness, in these kinds of moments of togetherness?
Thank you. Good. Others?
Yeah, these are really, Susan, okay. Thank you so much, Isha. These are really, really wonderful summaries of the common threads we have encountered. I want to agree with you that the embodiment, that's the especially Joe's talk on the dancing body, that really fascinates me. And I would love to hear him talking about more in terms of, how particularly in the context where we mostly address hope as an idea, in cognitive and cognitive terms. What would a dancing body teach us otherwise about being hopeful? And I would just love the idea about thinking in terms of spatiality and sociality in place of temporality, because I figured, at least between you and me, the hope is really about the present. I feel very affirmed by what you just said, because the critique is that it's all about the future, and then you got unnecessarily anxious, but it's really not. And I remember Pavlov here, for instance, gave a talk on Greek philosophy, and the original words they use for hope are all in one way or another connote some kind of cognitive activities. Knowing, it's really about knowing better as the foundation of hoping better. It's very much in the present. So that in that sense, a very sort of fixation on temporality actually is kind of misleading in that way. And it just reminds me this very this anthropologist Turner's idea of communica, in a way that in a moment of liminality, that all of a sudden people come together as if they feel the same significance, a very, very hefty significance, which transcends the type of social categories they normally would experience. And that sounds to me is what hope is very close to.
Mhm. Good. Thank you.
I
Sonia?
mean, I totally agree. I was struck by how women figured in all three of my co-panelists' talks, except for mine. The only woman I mentioned is a friend who owes me money. But Joshua, you mentioned Every Mother's Son. Joe, you mentioned the women dancing La Coca Sola. Yeah, you mentioned the woman who shattered the Great Wall with her tears. And I was struck by how this thread of women being at the heart of hope came out in all of your points, except for mine. So I'll deal with that.
Joe, anything? Yeah,
Sure.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? So I'll try my stand-up career as well. As a very wise person once told me, there is no I in hope.
Yes.
But I think this also speaks to this question of hope as something communal, something shared, and it is only thinkable in these kind of collective situations. And this also brings up the idea of what an Argentine scholar calls situated hope, right? So thinking through Donald Haraway's idea of situated knowledges, right? That hope is always something that is situated, but yet at the same time offers a grammar, right? That can be shared across different contexts. So I really appreciated hearing that in these wonderful presentations.
So I have a question for all four of you. You need not all answer it, but I started thinking about it when she was talking, and then I sort of kept thinking about it through the rest of them. And let me see if I can put it into words. I may not be able to, but something like this. I'm struck by the verbs we use when we talk about where hope comes from. That is, that hope seemingly is not something we just, on the evidence of what you're all saying and what others have written in the colloquy, hope is not necessarily something we just think or feel. It has to be imagined, or it has to be brought into existence through some kind of act of not necessarily the imagination, but the will, the ability to imagine, to foresee a future, something like this. And I can't help but think that that fact is somehow also connected to what you were indicating, which is, several of you were, but you started it, was this kind of almost privileged relationship that art has to hope, that art does some of the work of helping us imagine hope. So reactions, if any.
I'm happy to go. I think absolutely. I think one of the things that rivets me so much to artistic representations is because these are sites where we can reimagine what a society could look like. And that is not only because they're kind of maybe futuristic or offering a totally different way of thinking about it, but that they allow us to dwell in moments that we might otherwise gloss over. And so in those moments of repetition, I think there's always the possibility that you can reimagine. And so the possibility of renewal exists in these moments of witnessing art forms where you're able to attend to scenes and struggles that otherwise you might, just because the sheer inertia or apathy or just fatigue that we all feel overcome by with the kind of onslaught of images that we're constantly assaulted with, that I think that art allows for that kind of opening for us to then possibly intervene, dislodge, a kind of accretion that the present consists of, right? So that in that possibility of repetition, you can dislodge, you can renew, and something new emerges. Like I'm thinking of Hannah Arendt's notion of the natality, right? Newness can emerge in these moments when you're witnessing art because you're able to imagine new worlds that could exist, or you're able to attend to the suffering that your own world is generating. And so it can generate some new insights.
Good, thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you, Roland. That's just, it's imagination is a really, really nice word to be thinking about this moment, because that now we have put wings on hope. Hope all of a sudden is about freedom, it's about renewal. And I like Jisha's point that, so hope works like highlighters, and we will be dwelling on the moments that we may not be paying attention to. And now we've got it marks those moments for us in a way, and then opens up new spaces. And I was just also thinking, just in general, how do we imagine, cognitively speaking? It requires a form of openness, and openness not in a way in a general affective sense, but also in a cognitive sense, that we need to somewhat dislodge our mind in places where we are so habitually fixated, and then let them free, release them in ways that we cannot control. And that, in a sense, that to me is the foundation of imagination.
Very nice.
It takes a lot of strength to do that.
Yes, it does. Yes, it doesn't just happen. Yeah, right.
I would also add the question of action, like that hope is not something that is passive, right? It requires an act, and how that sort of stands in sort of opposition or contradiction to how we think about hope as this sort of like abstract thing, right? But the other thing I was thinking about was this, in order to sort of like, to quote Nietzsche, in order to create, you must destroy. And yeah, you mentioned this like contradictory element that resides within hope. And so I just sort of think of how these contradictions continue to emerge, both in our conversation here, but I think in hearing a lot about the work that you all have shared and everyone else here over the course of the year, contradictions.
Cool. Joe, anything?
Absolutely. Thinking of art as something, a narrative practice, right? Even if it's not using words, right? It creates narratives. And I was in a conversation yesterday thinking about what are the potential narratives that create the space for the reintegration of non-state armed actors in Colombia versus Mexico, and how do these stories function? What is the role of art as a very privileged form of kind of narrative and storytelling in these spaces? But also recognizing that it is certainly not univalent, right? It cuts many different ways, and these same narratives are always at risk, and maybe hope is something, an important way to keep that kind of level-headedness about not getting lost in what art is and what it offers and how it functions, in very concrete situations.
That's interesting. The idea that if I hear what you're saying, that those narratives produce complexity inherently. They're not linear and they're not straightforward. And yet hope might be the ingredient that we add to them that helps us keep focused on a future of some kind. Yeah. Yeah, very nice. Let's open to the audience. Comments, questions, please.
I think hope in itself is an igniting point of any work of art. When you put your hand on a paper, you're hoping that words come out of you onto that. You take a painting on its canvas, hope is innate to it. Otherwise you can't paint, you can't write,
I love that.
you can't dance.
Yes. It's a beautiful
The
observation.
words itself, hope. Yeah?
Mhm.
And also, I wanted to ask the panel, what do you see the difference between hope and expect?
That's
Any
really
comment on that? It's interesting. Hope is more like out there, expect is more like
I already know it.
you're looking for an outcome and you're going toward it. Hope is more like abstract. I'm hopeful about it, but I'm not sure. I know sometimes I'll get there.
May I respond to this one? I love this one. Is like theory of knowledge. My understanding would be that I would be speaking with much greater certainty when I say I expect something to happen, versus when I say hope, I might be hoping something that is completely beyond my control or knowing. So in that sense, there's kind of an epistemic certainty that embedded in the act of expecting. But I think that's what makes hope beautiful. In this is my point of bringing up vulnerability, because we're not sure. We don't know we don't have enough information at this moment to know what's exactly going to happen. So there's a sense of openness there, right? It's anticipation with eagerness, but also with an acknowledgement of the insufficiency of the self at this moment. And to me, that's a much more interesting human point of view. And when a person speaks a certainty and sort of a degree of imperviousness, that normally comes from a position of power. So that to me is the difference. It's often the hope it's sort of a statement of power from a powerless situation.
I would have to agree. The word hope, or as simple word, and for the story, that's a simple hope what's happening. Involves anything, involves change, involves the present. One is simple, it's not aggressive. It's such a move forward.
Carol.
Listening to each of your brief presentations, 3 words come to mind. One that seem to be present in all of yours, and one is strength, trust, and resistance. It took, each one of your stories or references, the women, who are manifesting the loss of their children. It takes, trust and strength, and it's a form of resistance. And, I think I'm just curious, those 3 words struck me as relevant in each of your cases, and particularly when you think about imagination and cognitive and both present and future. And I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I would love to go back to what Ya was suggesting in terms of vulnerability, because to me, that becomes a really fecund kind of category that can allow us to maybe probe these ideas. Like Judith Butler has some work on not making vulnerability and resistance antonyms, but thinking about vulnerability as a kind of resistance. So sort of embracing vulnerability and that notion of openness, so that we don't necessarily think of vulnerability as weakness anymore, but as strength, as you're suggesting. So that openness allows you to be impacted by various forces, so that if that is your orientation and your ethic of encountering difference and encountering others, then that becomes a space in which you can be far more generous, I think, as a person in the world. It's an ethical orientation that wouldn't require you to be constantly on guard or on edge, and allows for more multiple kinds of engagements and encounters. So I actually find vulnerability a very, very helpful category to think with.
Thank you, Jisha. That's exactly the reference I cited in my book,
Oh, I see.
Judith Butler's Precarity.
I would say perhaps we can even think of Samya's presentation as kind of bringing these 3 terms together, right? That strength, trust, and resistance, if I got them right. Resistance,
Resistance.
resistance,
Yeah.
right? I mean, resistance to, bringing in the idea of the heterogeneous now, right? You're resisting one specific narrative of a way to think about hope and to present. Trust that we would go with you on this journey, this beautiful, mind-bending journey of your experiences with hope and glitter. And then, taking this vulnerability as a strength that allowed us to think through hope in a really different and powerful way.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Please.
Hi, everyone. Oh, that was way too close to my mouth. Yeah, so I wanted to piggyback on the conversation about the sort of distinction between hope and expectation, which was really interesting to me. So I'm really interested in how there are kind of different object relations that seem to be present in how all of you described hope. So I guess I would be really curious to hear how hope kind of relates to its object in all of these certain ways, especially like it seems like there is a kind of hope as a kind of in itself kind of attitude that has no external relation that none of you are kind of really interested in. But then there's this sort of open relationship to something in the world that is also has various kind of degrees of concretion. And I'm just curious if you can all say a little bit about how you see basically the relationship between hope and its object, because it seems like if you get too abstract in a certain way, then you have, basically this like kind of spiraling like Seinfeld abstraction and like cynicism, or is that like the pinnacle of hope? I don't know. I couldn't tell how ironic you were being, but you brought up Nietzsche, so as the resident Hegelian, I figured I would ask if there was a distinction between hope in and for itself that all of you might be able to make, because this sort of openness also means a certain kind of unfinished object as well that you're trying to kind of, in art objects seem like very particular to that, to sort of negotiating that relationship as well. So I was wondering if any of you have sort of thoughts on this relationship between
I
hope
have a
and its
thought.
object. Yeah, let's hear it.
What is more hopeful than glitter? Honestly, like it's.
I thought you were going to say Seinfeld.
No, and it started off in my idea was like in my head, it was a joke. But I was like, there's something about glitter, it's hard to get rid of, you know? And no one can get mad at glitter. Like, well, I mean, if you are getting mad at glitter, then maybe you should sort out your priorities. But I have a strong position that this question of the object and hope can be seen through glitter. And also, like, when we think about glitter being so compact, and then when it's the space in between, I'm sorry.
Thank you for these amazing presentations. Just a quick question. I guess I was struck by how personal some of the reflections are on hope, and I'm curious if thinking about hope particularly encouraged you to write more personally about your own experience. And I guess a follow-up is that, is there a way to talk about hope that's not personal or not individual? Yeah.
I think Samia may have the best answer to this, but I'll just take it up. I would be very insecure if I admit I cry a lot, and that's why I've been writing about tears and crying. I actually don't cry a lot, so not in that, from that perspective, it's personal. But I thank you for asking. Actually, this is something I need to do some personal reflections in terms of how do I choose research topics. I was trained as a historian of science. All I have been doing is very, very dry theory of knowledge, very, very philosophical and abstract, no objects at all. But then one day I just went through my archive and thinking about other things. I realized how much men cried in pre-modern China. And then I wrote an article on it. A lot of people don't like it, but I like it a lot. Because I'm just doing my job as a historian. I'm not criticizing you, man. And then it struck me that I may know a little bit about human emotions, just as a person. I think in the way we click, I click with my topic, and that's how I got started.
Hi, thank you so much. Very thought-provoking and reveal. I like Jeremy Bentham. The future resembles the past. And I also choose to be an optimist, to see the world as is as best I can, but to be optimistic. So I've thought a lot about what's the difference or what differentiates hope from fantasy and what differentiates hope from illusion in the context. And I think that to genuinely have hope, you must be connected to the world as it is. So I wanted just to ask, do you have a reaction to what is the difference between hope to fantasy and beyond fantasy is illusion?
I can try, why not? I mean, I'm really grateful for all these excellent questions. There are so many that are so rich, right from Brian's question, and it sort of makes me think about Fred Moten's work and the object and the ability of the object to object, the objection of the object, and what is the objective that we have in our artworks? Is there a kind of solution, problem-solving approach that we're hoping our artworks take us to? And if we want to resist that sort of objective finding mission in our humanistic disciplines, what is the purpose of humanities? Is itself an objective finding kind of position to take? So I think it's very generative to think with objects, with the question of objection that we're all grappling with, as well as what is the objective of these questions. So I think it opens up an array of possibilities, as well as Pema. It's so great to see you. And I know, Pema, you've been thinking very deeply about hope, and you did this incredible exhibition at Asian Art Museum, which on hope. So I know you have a lot to contribute as well to this conversation. And I think, yes, absolutely. I think one of the things that we're all grappling with is questions of solidarity. So moving beyond the self and the individual and thinking about hope. And I think the question you've posed is really important, especially in our mass-mediated society where we are indoctrinated into what we are supposed to desire. And that becomes the realm of fantasy, I think, is that we begin to, almost yearn for mimetically because other people want it. So there's a kind of mimetic generation of fantasy and desire, which, as you're suggesting, maybe we need to distinguish from being in the present, which maybe generates an attentiveness to what our material formations are and what is the kind of material society that we're inhabiting, which is of course always infiltrated by our fantasies of the good life or what commodities or other sort of material, desires we may want to pursue. But there does seem to be an attentiveness to questions of what is in this moment and present that that is trying to separate itself from the kinds of fantasies and discourses we're also constantly interpolated into through our mediascapes and commodities and just the world we inhabit today. But I think that's generative distinction to think about the differences between hope and fantasy.
Can I just
Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. This is such a wonderful question. I just wanted to follow Jisha's point. I was thinking, is there a more generous way or lenient way in terms of thinking of differentiations from a very practical instrumental point of view that the most immediate use of hope is to make me feel better, right? So I hope to have chocolate cake tonight for dinner. That makes me feel better. I could fantasize about having the best chocolate cake ever in the world, which is made by my grandmother who's far away from here. That's a fantasy that won't be realized in any terms for today. But the commonality will be that I immediately feel better and about the day I'm having. So in that sense, I was just thinking, going back to the point Jisha made in her talk, it's about creating a horizon that is not punitive, that is about care and creativity. So to me, that is a very expansive realm where we make anticipations about what we might have. I see the problems with flaws of fantasy and illusions in particular in a way that are not properly positioned or related to the world. But they also have that heat that activates, that frees us. Another example would be that when we get drunk or get into the altered states of consciousness by other means, we feel better, right? And a lot of creativity actually emerges from those states of consciousness. They are also terrible for us, for instance, getting drunk, but they're good for some other reasons.
Before we take another question from the in-person audience, let me ask a question on behalf of someone in the remote audience. This is from a Stanford alum who is tuning in from Shanghai. Thank you for allowing those of us far away to be inspired by your words and insights. I wanted to ask about the role of humor in hope, perhaps especially in context with oppression or censorship. It came up a bit in some of the remarks already, but I wonder whether in such contexts is leaning into humor and joy in hope a means of reaching toward hope over despair.
Yes, 100%. I think as long as we still have the capacity to laugh, there's still hope. But also, yeah, censorship. I mean, I have a particular and intimate relationship with this question as a journalist who was exiled from Morocco because of my writing, and learned to sort of lean into the more sort of whimsical parts of life that allow us to express a sincerity and an earnestness that otherwise is not allowed in certain contexts, i.e. censorship. And I find that humor and comedy always does it for me, at least. And as long as I can laugh, I know at least for the rest of the day, I'll be okay.
In context of disappearance, sorry to bring it back to that. This is actually a really contentious issue, is the role of humor. And you see a lot of difference in terms of different contexts, different scenarios, right? Someone from Argentina might write a deeply humorous play about dealing with disappearance, and that might be something that ignites a wonderful conversation, a powerful, painful conversation with somebody from Mexico who's working with mothers searching in the Sonoran Desert. So I think it's a really important part of this discussion. I have nothing intelligent to add about its role, but I have seen in person how humor really does create new ways to understand the way, the situated hope in different contexts, and what are the ways to talk about it and implement it.
And it's like kind of funny and ironic that if you laugh hard enough, you cry.
Yes.
Okay.
I want to ask you guys this forgiveness. When I was 16, I was valedictorian and I was expelled from school. And then when I was 17, at another school, I was valedictorian and expelled. So in the spirit of that, like 16, 17-year-old girl who was expelled from 2 elite schools, had dubious distinction. I want to actually just read 2 paragraphs against hope. Yes. So, all right. So I think back about the story of Pandora's box. When the lid was open, all the ills of the world rushed out eagerly, except for Hope, who supposedly waited gently, patiently for us to lift her out. You're right. Who stays in a prison when the doors have been unlocked? Oh, wait, actually, most of us. Because most of us are comfortable, right? With the safety of incarceration, with the safety of being small. But not Hope, no. She would have been one of the first to break the surface and breathe in clean air, to flicker away, to shake the dust from her hair. It's much more likely that someone else stayed in the box. Fear, or maybe lust, as he lazily posted up, finally free to spread his legs as wide open as possible and to welcome us to come to him. I spent a lot of time looking into boxes for Hope, even though this is probably the last place she would ever be. The number of children amputees in Gaza are so numerous that medical staff has started to place the severed limbs of children in small cardboard boxes sealed with masking tape. The boxes are labeled with the name and the body part, Salahuddin foot, except for the cases where the children were too young to know their own names. Then there is the Vernon C. Bain Correctional Center, a jail barge with cargo containers that is currently being used to house the overflow of prisoners from Rikers Islands. 500 men floating in a box. It isn't that I am searching for Hope in all the wrong places, but perhaps we have misnamed her. Perhaps we have miscast her. Perhaps the cruel optimism of Hope isn't exactly what we need right now. Maybe there is something to be said for despair, for following the angels that our parents warned us against, for bathing in tears of rage, for loving fiercely and so inappropriately that we try to walk on water and drown.
That was the equivalent of a mic drop, I think.
Speak loudly. I was born with a microphone. Just to add a practical meaning to hope, I think the golden mean of Aristotle applies too. I'm just thinking about false hope. When you talk about hope, there is something, associated with giving people false hope. Then comes the anxiety and/or applying it to your own life, talking about Buddhism. So I can see it, I can argue with him that perhaps not all hope is bad, but false hope is bad. So you have to bring it to practical. What is it you hope for? So we can hope for things that are totally out of our reach. That's not necessarily good either. So just want to bring the golden mean in it. That's all.
That indeed, that's very true. I guess that's why philosophers from a lot of different parts of the world in the pre-modern times, when they talk about hope, they really talk about how to know better. So in that sense, hope has to be soundly epistemically grounded some way. Also, speaking as the mouthpiece of Buddhists, and they may correct me if I'm wrong. If even the good hopes, the right hopes, the well-grounded hopes can create anxiety. For instance, if I'm completely immersed in the present at this moment, I should be having a good time, right? Enjoying this wonderful conversation in this room. And yet I'm hoping for the chocolate cake I'm going to have for dinner, which is gonna happen. I'll make it happen. So it's not a false hope. And yet that would distract myself from the pleasure of the present at this moment. And I would say that also creates an issue that's not necessarily there.
May I respond to the previous
Please.
comment? Thank you, Harshini, for that beautiful and powerful piece, and I think an important reminder to think with hope here. I guess a couple words kind of stood out, right? We, so thinking from my own subject positionality and working with Women Searching for Disappeared Folks and doing advocacy work and talking to other advocates. Sometimes there's a kind of potentially kind of an imperative to maintain hope. And it's kind of a cliche, but in advocacy work, right, you can't be a good advocate if you're not being hopeful for yourself, and you can't provide care and service to people from that position. So I appreciate you bringing this, grounding this. And also, I cited David Scott, and I think one of the things that's beautiful in David Scott's work, and he talks a lot about hope specifically in some work and in the background in others, is this idea that what hope allows you to see is how problems are framed in their specific time. So potentially understanding hope as despair in certain moments allows us to think about these problems in new ways. Although Scott puts less focus on the power of the transformative acts, but folk gets into the question and answer, historiography. I think there is something really important about thinking about how we parse hope and despair, and what it tells us about where we have invested ourselves, for better and for worse.
Let me interject one more question from the remote audience. This is from Kenya. Quote, I remember when former US President Bill Clinton was leaving office, he said, and I quote, I came from hope, and hope is where I return. Leaving aside Bill Clinton, I want to ask the panel on behalf of this audience member, what is the connection between, is hope something that we associate with origins and also as a kind of hoped for destination, but perhaps something that we're passing through something else in the present? This is what Harshini was saying, we may be in despair at any moment, or disillusion, or even lack of feeling, but many of us might feel that we've been hopeful before and we would like to be hopeful again, that it has a kind of a trajectory. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I find the word that I think you offered, ignition, very helpful, because it is a word that, I think that hope is something, rather than the kind of maybe paralysis that despair can induce in us. Hope ignites us. There's a spark that it ideally would allow us to think of an alternative or think of other solutions, alternative worlds. And this is the same, suggestion that you were making of thinking of imagination as work, the poesis of imagination, so that we're not only thinking about in terms of very abstract fantasy, but what is the work that we need to do? What is the work that these imaginations propel us to do? So hope as a kind of discipline almost that can ignite action. I think that can be very productive rather than kind of feel paralyzed by despair. I think, it does have that trajectory and momentum that it can give you, which, despair would rob you of. And I completely agree that this is a moment where you have to fight that sense of paralysis and continue to imagine alternative worlds and scenarios.
Sorry. I detected a common theme in the initial presentation. I think it was touched on in a couple of conversations about the relationship between hope and power. I think the presentation initially, I sensed that hope is redeemed for the oppressed. And I'm very much in agreement with that. It's to hope for change. But is that necessarily the only, are you only redeeming hope in the absence of power? Can you not have hope if you are able to be in a position of power? Is that what we're saying? Or institutions can't have hope if they are too powerful, or people can't have hope if they're too powerful?
It sounds like something coming out of what I said, if I'm understanding it correctly. Yeah, right. Yeah, because I was talking about vulnerability as a form of resistance from a powerless position. And I also said, speaking with absolute certainty and impervious comes from a position of power. I think this might be where you get the message. That's a very good question. I mean, it's not about absolutely yes or no, right? So say if my father says, I hope you will finish your homework tonight on time. That is a voice coming from a position of power. And it's not really about anticipation in an open-ended way. It's really about asking me to finish my homework on time. Versus many other examples I can cite. I don't want to say chocolate cake again, but for instance, I'll just cite a student organizer that I watched on YouTube 2 weeks ago, and she said, was facing an imminent raid. She said, we're scared, but it's okay to be scared. We hope to hold the line. Versus what my dad just told me to do my homework. Did you see the difference? So it's all mapped onto a spectrum, the idea of certainty, you know, the kind of space you leave in terms of to remain open-ended, or as in the form of command. It maps onto a very broad spectrum, but I do think the element of power is worthwhile for us to consider, especially at this moment of this world.
Last question. Your father say, you hope you finish your homework tonight. If I were the daughter, I would think the huge difference is I expect you to finish homework tonight versus I hope. If he said I hope, I'd be smiling saying, oh, hope. You may not get done.
Let's have one more question from inside the room before we move to continue outside in a reception. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Is hope something that can be given? I believe, yes. If you talk and be hopeful that you can give, somebody hope, that means, the hope that can be given. But, the 4 scholars that they did presentation today, that they have hope. I realize that all of you that you have hope. But how you can give hope to other people? Like I came from Gaza recently, and the area it's full of despair. I don't have hope. How you can give hope, for the people like me? Thank you.
May I add on that? I was raising my hand to say something in correlation to this thing. And I think hope is contextual. You cannot just generalize hope with the abstraction that it is something handy, I can pull it from the shelf and live it, and today I'm hopeful. It's incremental. It's this space that we internalize to break things between what we can achieve and what we cannot achieve. It's something that imaginative for every individual. That's why it's sometimes individual, not communal. And we cannot mix it between hopes and dreams. Sometimes what hope and hopes, and I can have many hopes, and I can have plenty of dreams. Can I connect them together? I don't know. So there is big difference between hoping for chocolate cake or hoping for freedom. So these are two different journeys. So if I take hope as individual journey, I will have plenty of internalized journeys, but I don't know if I can achieve them or not. That might be desperate, but sometimes we say we are desperate for hope. So I think this answered the questions.
Thoughts?
That's a great line. I think it characterizes the entire world at this moment. We're desperate for hopes. Thank you.
Last word. Go ahead.
I'm going to ask you if there is a dark side of the word hope, besides power and or nervousness when you are hoping, something like jealousy or to kill someone, eat the heart. As we know, some serial killers do that, right? We know Gaber, I guess his name. So how far they can go, the bad side of hope? This is one question. If it is possible, I would like to ask you one more thing. If there is any other animals, apes, looks like us, baboons, they are not apes, but chimpanzees, or is there anything, what is the function of the brain? That's my question.
Brain science.
Oh, really?
No, I was kidding. I mean, I think in the earlier comment, right, cruel optimism was used, right? And optimism isn't the same as hope, but I think that does signal potentially some of the effects, right? And hope is not the exclusive realm of the powerful, right? And power is not exclusively right to the powerful, right? All subject positions are engaged in power relations when they interact. So with this idea of cruel optimism, right? Hope can be used as a way, as a form, right? That goes back to this earlier question of fantasy. That's the obstacle to flourishing. And I think that, again, we went back to the contextual, and I think this brings it back to contextual cases. I think it's a very powerful account of the United States. I don't necessarily think it maps on to the way optimism or hope might function in contemporary Latin America. So I think context matters. Again, not a very satisfying answer, but powerful remarks and questions. Thank you.
And if I may add, it might be simple to say that we need to connect hope with the more ethical vision of a horizon we're imagining. But how do we exactly do that? I think a lot of comments made in this room has provided structural guidance. For instance, going back to my point, if I hope from an egocentric point of view and in fixation on fixation of something that is satisfied my very specific interests in the territory where myself goes impure over other people, that's not good hope. That's why I want myself to be able to feel vulnerable. And that vulnerability meaning I can sense the precarity of other people's situation. I can hope in the sense that I situate myself in interpersonal relationships in a way I actively adopt the ethical perspective while I am hoping. So that goes to the point of taking care of other people, paying attention to contexts of different individual lives, and specifically to the corners of the world, parts of the world which are going through the most ferocious human suffering at this moment.
Let's get ready for our reception outside. Before we thank our speakers one more time, I want to mention that we have several more events coming up in May, mostly here in this room, and as well as hybrid. Next Tuesday, 4 p.m. right here, we will welcome Claire Lees from the School of Advanced Study at the University of London, which is one of our partner institutions, speaking on the humanities in practice. She's going to speak about the ways that humanistic research right now interacts with the arts and with other kinds of very practical kinds of sort of hands-on things that people do in some of our fields. And then the week after that, That would be May 21st. Also here, a Tuesday at 4 p.m., the Italian philosopher Davide Tarizzo speaking on biopolitical anthropology and an introduction. And we have a couple more things too, but everything's on our website under events, and you're always welcome to join us either in person or online. Shall we thank these fellows as also these fellows one more time?